Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sounds from the Studio, brought to you by Contemporary Craft. Contemporary Craft fosters the use of traditional craft materials such as ceramic, fiber, glass, metal, and wood to make art. Our community honors the history and heritage of craft while showcasing modern, exploratory work.
And since our organization is located in Pittsburgh, PA, we decided to bring some of the stories of our exhibiting and studio artists to a broader audience by way of this podcast. I'm Rachel, the Executive Director at Contemporary Craft.
And I'm Kahmeela, podcaster and art enthusiast. We are your hosts for this journey, and there are many ways to keep up with us. You can go to the Facebook page and like it, Contemporary Craft, on Twitter at SCCPGH, Instagram at SCCPGH, or just go to contemporarycraft.org.
For all of our listeners out there, did you know that we offer workshops within our studios? From weaving to metalsmithing or even meditation with mark making, we have a variety of workshops that are happening all year round. We hope you'll take a look at the studio tab on our website and see what's coming up to find yourself something creative to do.
Welcome, Brie, to Sounds from the Studio. We are glad that you have joined us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Kahmeela.
Brie, it's nice to be talking with you again. We recently opened your exhibition here, of course, at Contemporary Craft, which has the title of Oneness, and we're definitely going to talk about that specifically in detail. But before we dive into it, can we just talk a little bit about your practice in general and how you came to clay? Some people might consider that you're working on such a massive scale, so how did you experience clay, or how did you decide to have an intimate relationship with it?
It started in 2011 while I was in grad school. I was looking for a material that would allow form to come from gesture. And because I'm not a painter, I'd always been working in sculptural materials. I was interested in this translation of the body's experience in the world and transmuting that into another material, into a material that's not the body. And so a lot of my influences at the time were performance artists from the 70s and 80s, artists who were using their bodies as their tool and as their medium. And because I love objects and I wanted to use my body and have something, an object that resulted from this use. So I arrived at clay from the experience of having used it as a young person, like as a teen, but not having any formalized education in it. I just I grabbed it. There was a tech who was J.J. Pete at Columbia at the time who kind of refreshed my memory on how clay works and how to fire it and this sort of thing. And then I just kind of figured it out as I went along. And as I scaled, I realized I had to scale up in the material. That's when I arrived at using 130 pounds of clay, which is my body weight, because in order to capture my experience as a body in the world, I needed to work with a volume that was similar to mine, or a mass, I guess. And so that's kind of where it started.
Oh, wow. So you're all about like literally putting your full body into the work. And
yeah, I mean, maybe in a way that's similar to how a lot of painters work abstractly, as kind of gestural abstraction or abstract expressionism. I'm doing that with clay.
And so there's a video right now, correct? That's running at Contemporary Craft alongside with your exhibit. So let's talk about that work in particular, just to let's talk about the exhibit of Oneness.
Yeah. That work in particular was shot in a clay quarry out here in New Mexico. It's a really small, ancient clay quarry. And I had permission to access it through a friend, a woman who's a potter here, Denise Lynch, owns the quarry and graciously allowed me to go take some clay from it. And I didn't have the intention of making a performance while I was there, but I was glad to have brought my drone camera, which is like I've been recording, making work out in the open land for a couple of years with a drone camera. And so I happened to have it with me, and was really delighted to find that the bottom of the quarry was all clay slip because there had been recent rainstorms. So it was this like perfect soupy clay slip that it wasn't even mixed with dirt. It was just like the surface of this quarry was all clay.
So for those who may not know, sorry to interject, like just the
Yeah.
clay quarry is just like a natural space where clay is. And
It's naturally occurring there, and it's a site where people have been excavating clay for hundreds of years, and so it's become a pit because of that
yeah.
that digging. And so all of the clay that's kind of in the earth, it crumbles down as you expose more, as you pull out more and more of it. So the bottom of the pit had clay in it. And because of the rain, it just became completely saturated and was like a clay mud.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're out there with your drone and
Yeah.
scavenging clay.
Yeah. And Denise had told me that she had been out there the day before and felt compelled to get naked and cover herself in the clay slip. And I thought, I have the same, like,
I am drawn to this clay.
Yeah.
Like I want to be one with the clay.
And so I asked my friend and Denise to like leave for a little while, and I set up the drone, and I didn't really know what would ensue, like what my gestures would be when I went as I walked into the site. But I set up the drone hovering ahead of overhead, looking down at a bird's eye perspective. And I love that perspective because it's a non-human perspective. I mean, the drone carries with it a lot of other, so obviously, weight of, military and technology and surveillance.
Right.
But one of the other things that it offers us is this literal bird's eye perspective. So, maybe, how birds see us from above, how the moon might look down on us, and our ancestors might look down on us.
It is a much nicer way to think about it as opposed to a voyeur, per se.
Yeah, there's the light and the dark always.
All right, so the moon is looking down upon you.
Exactly. And the way that this also relates to the work that I have in the show is that the work is on the wall, but I make it on the floor. So there's always that transition between the ground to the wall, to the vertical. So that's also why I like using the overhead perspective, because then when it's on the projector, you're looking at it in this frontal way. And so I just started working from the center out in the clay, which is, how I work in the studio. And I was pushing outward and rotating and enjoying the feeling of it because it was so much less resistant than clay is when it's in a more malleable state. When you are working with clay, it's stiffer, and this was more like mud. And so I was, just moving around, and I kind of ended up going around in or rotating my body in a circle maybe 3 or 4 times, which is something I hadn't done in the studio. And I felt a little bit like the needle of a compass, or, the hands of a clock, rotating and rotating. And when I look at that video in the context of the exhibition, I see it as a kind of effort to locate oneself like in a place. And this ended up being the place where I moved to a year later.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of like this search for home
Oh,
in a personal way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Had you ever done anything like that before? Just like giving yourself up to the clay or mud even?
I have done that where when I make ephemeral works and they don't result in finished objects in the studio, they are always made with in the moment in response to the area or the environment that I've chosen. So I've made works on the shore in Far Rockaway, Brooklyn. Where else? In my garden that I had in Brooklyn. So some of those pieces are in the show. I made pieces also in Nevada in a really rural location, but one that has this kind of human infrastructure that goes unnoticed. So there are like gas pipelines and ranch fences kind of cutting through this otherwise untouched landscape. So I'm kind of responding to the presence of those.
So you talked about the work in Brooklyn, and also since we're on the video, I would say for our listener, there's a number of photographs or a few photographs in the exhibition as well. And I love the inclusion of this type of visual work because it helps, I think, add a layer of understanding for the viewer. And I guess this is probably a good spot to say that you worked really closely with Yusan Chang, who is our associate director, in terms of the curation and the compilation of the work. But in general, from what I have seen of your work or in other situations as well, like video and imagery seem to play a contributing role. And when you talk about just even that experience in the quarry and even, seeing you push out from the center in the studio, there's a total intimacy, right, between you and the material. And then also there is a bit of this like voyeuristic moment for the viewer that like is witnessing that intimacy. So I'm curious why you decided to show that to people, or like how do you feel about people experiencing that?
So I had always been documenting the process in the studio without the intention of exhibiting it because it felt almost too one-to-one, like too didactic in a way. And then when I shot a piece, when I formalized the video and separated the process from the studio and what's the word, like concentrated it more in the gestures or distilled it more to the gestures and the place, that seemed to like function more as a work of art than just pure documentation. So the first piece that I did that on, video piece, was when I made a performance on at the shore in Brooklyn. So it was called The Movement at the Edge. And or no, it was called. Sorry, you're gonna have to edit this so badly. So the piece that I made on the beach in Brooklyn was called Tidal Movement, and I went out there with 130 pounds of clay and put it where the water was washing up on the shore. And the choreography that I had in mind was to push the clay towards the ocean as the waves were receding, and then to turn around and push it towards the shoreline as the waves were washing up or coming in. And this was low tide, so it wasn't big crashing waves, thankfully, and it was also November. But it was an interesting experience because what happened was not what I was expecting, which is that I thought syncing up with the rhythm of the waves would be like a snap. Yeah. And instead I spent 10 minutes trying to figure out what the rhythm was. So I'm, I mean, I suppose that's what surfers
I
could
guess,
have told
yeah.
me.
That makes sense. Yes.
And I liked that the video captured that. This It wasn't just me and the clay, it was me and the clay and the water. And that's when I realized that clay was mediating my experiences with my environment, or with the natural world perhaps. And that I showed that piece in an exhibition, and the response was so positive. People were so glad that I had shared some of the process with them behind the sculptures, that it kind of felt like from then on I wanted to be generous with the way that I think about my work and the way that I make my work.
Right, because oftentimes there is a lot of story in the actual process of making the art.
Yeah.
Oh, I really appreciate that definition or explanation, I should say, too, of you saying that, like, it's a mediation. Because I think, there's this discussion that happens a lot about, like, should you show your process? Should you not show your process? I love process personally, sometimes even more than output. But I think there's something that's happening in the gallery because of the inclusion of that video and those photographs. And so when I ask about the intimacy, that word, that it's, mediating, is so interesting to me, because I think, like, people have had such a strong response to this exhibition, and they feel very connected to the work, which it's big, like, that's something we haven't totally, traversed in this conversation. It's pretty large work. And so to feel intimate with something that big, of course, you can see your marks and you can see handprints or footprints or things of that nature. But I think that video really brings people, like, close to you and close to the experience in a way that I think then mediates their experience with these large kind of tapestry like pieces. So in no way is it, like, gratuitous to have that process. It's just incredibly significant and important in the relationship building,
Right.
I think, for the viewer. So,
Yeah. No, that's so great to hear. And Camila, to your point too, like this idea of sharing that story, I think is the story is part of the
Right.
work. So why should it? I mean, I think some people can, like, I remember a visitor at Contemporary Craft asked if I was comfortable showing my naked body like that big in the
Yeah.
exhibition, and
Valid question.
I yeah, I mean, I've never been a very modest person, so it doesn't bother me, but it also feels like, yeah, it feels like something I want to provide for the viewer's experience to connect more with the work.
Well, also you can't. I mean, you did it in the first place, and you recorded it in the second place. So I mean, you can't be too shy about showing it out there. So,
Right.
as Rachel has mentioned, Rachel's mentioned your pieces, your exhibitions are very large in size, and you mentioned that you also take up floor space as well as on the walls. And so, like, in what other ways are you inspired by, like, place and time and space to create these landscapes?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I was thinking before our interview, like, how all of the work intersected, and something that came to mind, because some of the work that's in the show is from 2015, and those are the unzipped line and unzipped circle and line pieces that are kind of like big rectangles on the wall. And I thought of, like, the show in general as, like, different ways of locating oneself in space and time, and also emotionally, and that those rectangular pieces, which I hadn't really put my finger on what they were doing before, kind of clicked with me this morning, is that those pieces came from a time when I was trying to locate myself in a kind of family. Like where my family, we've kind of always been far apart, on opposite sides of the country, or like there's this, leaving your family when you're 18 and going across the country. Like this is the story that's for a couple of generations. And so those pieces were made in the dimensions of an area rug that might be in a living room, and they were made with the body weights of three combined people. And then two forms were torn out of them, so resulting in like three separate forms. And so while there are these dislocated forms that are on the floor now in the exhibition, you see them kind of scattered about, they still call back to the source
Right.
or the map or the rug. And so I see that, those pieces as a kind of, you know, reconciliation
Yeah.
with the way that I've thought about how my family operates.
That's a beautiful representation of, just like the dynamic of family and growing up and moving on and just
Yeah,
kind of like, ancestry, basically. I like that.
thanks.
So the answer to that question leads into a question that I have about another work in this space, and it's one that has carried a lot of weight for me. Like because we experience the work, of course, every day being here, and it looks kind of like phases of the moon or an eclipse. And during your artist lecture with the public, you talked a bit about your experience with your mother and her experience of dementia and being present and vacant at the same time, essentially. So I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to talk about that work a little bit, because it has so much prominence in the space, and I think also understanding it really adds a level to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what I was saying during the artist presentation is that that piece, the phasing eclipse of two bodies, is the evolution of a body of work that I did start making because of what I was experiencing with my mom. And that body of work was more like single moon pieces, which I, you know, starting in the pandemic and then intensifying when I moved to New Mexico, my awareness of the moon became bigger and more prominent in my life. And it was, I believe, because of how I was experiencing my mom with dementia as someone who, we have so much intimacy. Like I came from her body, she, we know each other as well as anyone, people could, as mother and daughter, I guess, and yet there's many years there was when that intimacy only existed on a physical level. Like it didn't exist, in conversation and dialogue. There was a way that she was both present and absent at the same time, and that's confusing, I think, for anyone who's experienced that. And I started to think about the moon as like experiencing this really intimate relationship to it, it charting my days and nights, it kind of tracking the passage of time. It also like having a relationship to the way that water moves and the way that, our bodies have cycles. But despite this intimate relationship, it's hundreds of thousands of miles away. And so that distance and intimacy is this, it's very contradictory, or it's complicated. And so that's kind of how I approached thinking about the moon. And then the piece in the exhibition is exploring the moment when the moon, earth, or the moon, the sun, the earth, and the viewer are in alignment to witness the eclipse, right? So the fourth body being the viewers, that is this point of perceiving this, massive celestial event, the alignment of all three bodies, four bodies. And I don't know, I mean, in some way, like I'll get a little bit like what's the like woo woo about it, I guess. But that there is
A little more
that there
spiritual?
is
Is what you're
yeah,
saying? Mystical?
yeah, a little spiritual about it. But yeah, what does that alignment really mean across so much space and time? Yeah, I think a lot about those relationships, both personal between humans and non-humans, but also between our bodies and other celestial bodies.
Yeah, it seems like you, as most artists do, like there's a lot of yourself, not just physically, but also emotionally that you're putting into your artworks and your pieces. Has there ever been a point where it's just you've been overwhelmed with the emotion that you are either stirring up, or that's just kind of like gets to you, like whilst even like before, after, or during the process?
I would say that it helps me to channel the emotion. Like if I am feeling, overwhelmed or by emotion, that then going into making a piece and making it will feel kind of like a purge or a catharsis. And I think that there are natural flows in the studio with like processing that emotion. And I think, for the past 4 months, I haven't made anything. And that's because there's a lot of other stuff going on in my life that is in transition. And I'm just trying to trust that that's what's meant to happen right now. And that there will be a time and a place when like everything that's been happening will get processed in the studio. So I would say I don't get overwhelmed by it in the studio, but I do in life. And then like it finds its way, it works its way out in the studio.
That's a great place for it.
Yeah.
Do you recall your first exhibition and what that was like, that experience was for you?
I do. It was in 2013. It was my first solo show in New York, and it was with Nicole Klagsbrunn, who had just closed her gallery in Chelsea after being in operation for maybe 30 years. And we had met, when she was already kind of closing up shop, and she still wanted to do a show with me. And she was really highly respected, had shown artists that were huge influences on me. And so for her to have that kind of faith and like support for my work meant so much. And we rented a space in Chelsea, and I think we showed 12 pieces, and it was a really important moment for me. And just I think like I was happy with the work that I made, but I more than that, like overcome by the kind of support that she provided. I think artists like need that,
Oh yeah,
someone to believe in their work.
exactly. Which brings me to when, at what point in your life did you accept that you're an artist?
Oh, that was a longer, that was a longer, or rather like more trying experience. After I graduated from undergrad, I didn't go back to school right away. I rented a loft space with a friend in Bushwick, and we each built out a bedroom and a studio for ourselves. And I thought, if I can like make my work without the structure of school for a few years while working full time, then I know I'm an artist. And it was kind of after a few years, and I was still making work in the studio, and I thought, okay, this is what I need to do. And that's when I decided to apply to grad school. And then it was in grad school that like I tried on that whole thing of like actually introducing yourself as an artist. What do you do? Oh, I'm an artist. Like, it's a really hard thing to say. Because, you know, where I grew up in Orange County, California, people don't take that seriously.
Yeah, and there's also, you know, you get these random and follow-up questions. And a lot of times there's nothing that you can really concretely answer to these questions. Like
No.
either you met with a blank face, or there's like a bunch of questions like, oh, it's a job interview at that point. And it's like, what do you do? How do you do it? How do you live? Blah, 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 blah.
Oh, yeah, it's mostly financial.
Right.
It is interesting how people feel like they can just launch into those questions that are so often financially situated.
Seriously, like, how do you pay your rent? Like, why does it matter?
So Brie, you know, I appreciate Kahmeela. That's kind of a standard question that we ask people. And I think the other one that we ask, you know, you mentioned a bit about people's work that you look to, but more specifically, did you have anyone that you considered a mentor, or even currently that you consider a mentor as you're working in this field?
Yeah, I do. I worked for Sarah Z for almost 10 years. I met her when I did a residency at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia. And she had work in the museum exhibit it was a group show, and they were installing it, and they needed the apprentices to help. And I was good at it, and I loved it. And so they invited me to work in the studio in New York. And so I worked on and off for her for 10 years. And it was during a time in her career when she was really arriving like on a much bigger platform. Like she, you know, in one of the last years that I worked for her, represented the US in the Venice Biennale. And so to see the way that she maintained a studio, to how she, you know, kept up a professional rigor as well as a creative rigor, like to witness that, I learned so much. So I think of her a lot still.
That's actually really heartwarming to hear. So often I ask questions about lineage, or especially in the field of craft. Like there's this passing of knowledge and oral history and tradition and things that, or I at least like to think are, you know, relative to craft. But certainly I think of my own like administrative trajectory and working alongside like as an apprentice, or things that we learn, and to hear that was so formative for you. I'm sure that's really also incredible for both Sarah and the Fabric Museum, that happened in that space, and that now look at you and your accomplishments, and how that lineage starts to you know, build on and on. So wow, thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
So I know Kahmeela is going to kind of wrap us up with the question we ask everybody, but in closing, I also just want to say thank you for spending time with us. Your work is incredibly beautiful. It's just got everything aesthetically that work can have, but you being willing to share so much about your personal experience and what's behind it. I hope that when people come in, they actually become one, no pun intended, with what's happening in there, and get to know the work, because those layers of complexity just really add so much to it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. And I had such an amazing experience with you and the staff at the center, and installing, and just the support and enthusiasm and excitement and embracing of my work just felt really, really good and special. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. We're low-key trying to get everyone to move to Pittsburgh.
Well, that's one thing about Rachel. She's going to make sure everyone feels welcome coming into that space. And I feel like you evenly, Rachel, like fangirl over every exhibiting artist that comes through there.
I do. I'm getting embarrassed
and I love
now.
it. Okay, so speaking of, I guess, fangirling in a way, we'll kind of get to know your musical tastes, Brie, once you tell us your 3 songs that you think describe your work.
It's a really hard question. But I wrote them down. And okay, so the first one is Meredith Monk, who is a voice artist. And there's a song called Mad Woman's Vision, which is one of many that I feel you could listen to get a sense of how she's using voice and breath and repetition, almost like a craftsperson might use a material and repeat a gesture, and is interested in like what those create together.
Oh, you really put thought in that one. I like that.
Impossible for me not to. And then Beverly Glenn Copeland, La Vida, is just one of my favorite songs, and kind of expresses a way that I aspire to be. And then The War on Drugs, Thinking of a Place.
All right. So we will add that to the list of our playlist on Spotify, Sounds from the Studio, songs that all of our other guests have contributed to otherwise. And anybody can go check that out, listen, follow, enjoy it. And the corresponding episode, an artist also appears on that list. Sounds from the Studio is produced by Rugged Angel Productions for Contemporary Craft. Hosted by Rachel Ruais and Kahmeela Adams, with production support by Mandy Wilson. Please subscribe to and rate the show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to share. Thanks for listening.